You've Got Michael, Living Through History, by Dan Beck. Out now. On October 15th, Dan Beck was interviewed about his book by noted author Alan Light.
So, there's a lot of Michael stuff to do here. And as we were talking about before, for me, it was fascinating to read the book because I really was on the other side of this, covering the Michael story in exactly the years, the phase that you're pulling all these strings, pulling everything together. But before we get into Michael stuff, because we have folks here who very much, I'm going to use the phrase, remember the time, set the early 90s record company scene a little bit, because we're pre-digital, we're pre-Napster, we're still really coasting on people replacing their LPs with CDs. You know, it's a steady economy, peacetime economy. It's boom time. So to just talk about what the major label universe was in the years that you're covering in the book.
Well, one of the things around 88, 89, the huge boom for the record companies at that time was catalog and conversion to CD. And so the record companies were just rolling in profit. I mean, the money was
and that's all found money.
Yes, it was totally found money. And everybody was flying, you know, it was all good. And at Epic, we had about somewhere between a 6.5 and a 7.5 market share. And, you know, we had a lot of kind of veteran artists, many of who mentioned before, Gloria Estefan, and Pearl Jam starting out, and Rage Against the Machine. Obviously, there was no email at the time, there were no cell phones. You know, we had to manufacture these records. We had a 14-week cycle to manufacture records and, you know, ship them out, get them on semis, and you know, get them to the stores and match up airplay exactly when the records were there. So easier on a superstar than obviously in developing artists. And but that was a big part of what was going on in those days.
But with that money pouring in, I mean, obviously Michael Jackson gets what he wants, but
yes,
there really was the sort of, if you could dream it up, it was there in front of you to just go do it.
Right. And also one of the things in Michael's case was that there was a joint venture in place. And so, you know, I spent a lot of time calling business affairs. Is this recoupable? Is this, you know, there was a keeper of the contract that I contacted all the time, particularly when we were in the midst of making music videos where the overages were flying. And, you know, in the middle of the night, I was getting calls, you know, about, Michael wants to do this. And usually, in most cases, it wasn't Michael asking for it, it was the production companies cranking the cost. And so it was like, and oftentimes it was difficult for me to get to him, you know, to find out in reality. But the other things, when we would hire a production company, we would tell them, you know, we're gonna put you with Michael, don't wind him up. You know, if you wind him up and you start cranking the budget, we will never pitch you again to him up. But what would happen is, you know, the production company would get involved and say, you know, Michael, we got 50 extras doing this, we should have 500. And he would say, yeah, you know, and so they'd mark that up 20%, you know.
Some of that I want to come back to, but let's talk about this moment that gives the book its title, which is
you know, leading up to that, number one, when I became Michael's product manager, I was 42, you know, and hey, the music business is a young business. And I had been, you know, kind of thrown into the mix, a lot of, you know, corporate politics, you know, you should go up the ladder and all that. And, you know, there were a couple of times I was passed over, and mostly because I didn't like the stuff of deciding whether somebody got 4.1 percent annual raise or 4.0, the only thing you could do is piss people off, and I hated that stuff, and so that probably didn't make me the greatest boss in the world. But I loved working with the artists, and I loved trying to get them through the corporate maze, and how we could get to the street with their point of view. I didn't really like working with what I would call production artists, which I saw as maybe great singers who were just a voice for a producer. I loved working with The Clash, I loved working with Pearl Jam, who were very difficult and didn't always trust me, but they had a point of view, and that's what I loved, and so working with those kind of artists. So, I kind of just went back into, hey, I'm just going to product manage. And so, as it turned out, my roster just kept doing better and better and better. Sade, it was Luther Vandross. I worked with Luther on 11 albums, and they were all platinum or double platinum. And Sade, multi-platinum. I worked with her on 4 albums over about 16 years. She didn't come back often, but again, a close relationship. And Gloria, and I just love those artists because they had a point of view, and that became everything to me. And all of a sudden, I had this fat roster. I had, all these good things going on. And there was a little corporate shakeup that happened, and Dave Glue stepped in my doorway. I was on the phone, and, it's the chairman, and I put my phone down and said, "Yeah, Dave, what is it?" And he said, "You've got Michael," and he walked away. And it was about 8 weeks before Dangerous was coming out, and I had no relationship with Sandy Gallin, and I really didn't have a relationship with Michael since years before. I never to this day knew whether he even remembered that I was around before that, So all of a sudden I was thrown into it, and fortunately Larry Stessel, who was my predecessor on the project, had all the pieces all working really, really well. But you had to get connected. When Frank DeLeo was the manager, he had such a relationship with all of us at Epic. It was like one call, "Hey Frank, we need this from Michael." Boom, it happened. Now Sandy became involved, and Sandy was an LA celebrity in and of himself, and he's running with David Geffen, and this high flying celebrity executives in the film and TV business, and I had no relationship there, and my first thought was, Sandy Gallin doesn't want to talk to me. He wants to talk to Walter Yetnikoff, or he wants to talk to Mickey Schulhoff, and so it was, and so much happens with a superstar artist where you have so many deadlines, particularly for photographs and things. And I was like desperate. How are we going to get the photo for the second single? And so many times when these artists work with, celebrity photographers, that you'd have an all-day photo shoot and you get 3 shots out of it. Why? Because the photographer said, "I'm not releasing them. I only like 2 of these." So you're kind of stuck, and we could burn through dozens and dozens of photos on Michael, in a day.
So how much were the lessons applicable from the stuff that you do, from the way that you had learned and done this and product managed with everybody else? I'm sure there's stuff that there are basic principles that hold, and then I'm sure there's stuff that's like, I'm in a whole other game with a whole other set of rules.
I mean, what you really know is how to get a superstar through the corporate, fishnet, and all the deadlines, and who needs what, and where, I knew Epic Records and the Sony Music distribution system unbelievably well. I thought that was my strength. That I knew how to turn on, our local offices, and you know, how to intrigue them, how to make sure they had the tools they needed to make things work. So that was all, you know, we knew how to do that, you know, but with Michael, it was, you know, it was such a sprawling operation, you know, multiple attorneys and multiple PR people and hangers-on and choreographers, and it was just a sea of people, and also that you had certain people in the system in that camp who were afraid to make decisions. And kind of how I got to Michael was that I'd be calling and say, hey, we need this photo, we need it by Tuesday, with blah blah blah, and you know, I'd find my fish through their system to get a solution. As it turned out, the people that really helped me the most were the assistants, you know, and Michael's assistant and Sandy's assistant, and you know, just the frontline people. And you know, I befriended them, and they were the ones who helped me
make things happen,
find my way, you know. And so they started calling me and said for help, you know, oh, hey, how do we get this done, or whatever. And then suddenly their bosses were asking them, hey, we've got to solve this problem, how do we do it? So, well, call Dan. And so suddenly, you know, it took months, but we built into this situation where kind of his team, the people that I recognized in his camp who were the workers and who got things done, that you know, we suddenly had a relationship.
So what did it take for you to win over Michael? Or was it just not even about that? And was it not about convincing? Because it seems like, in the meantime, he's just obsessed with breaking records, seeing numbers that have never been seen before. Like there's a very clear focus from him on where his attention is. So for you, was it figuring out how to play into that enough to, you know, convince him that you could hold up your end?
Yeah, you know, I think gradually it started to come to, even to Michael, you know, where Evie and Norma in his office would say, oh, maybe Dan can help us with that. You know, Michael would ask for something simple, and they say, oh, the record company can help you, we'll call Dan, you know. So I think he started to get a little feel that way. But there were two instances where I think we really connected. And one was that Epic really didn't have any home video on Michael. And you know, here's an artist, a visual artist, you know, and I thought, my God, we've missed the boat. You know, it's like, you know, when Dangerous comes out, we should have a Dangerous home video, you know, and so we were in a meeting at one point, and I had, you know, gone through all this extraneous footage that existed and music clips and things like that, and I said in a meeting to Michael, I said, you know, Michael, we have 90% of a home video, and then I just kind of laid out, you know, 10 pieces that would make it up. And he got really excited, and he said, wow, that's great, you know. And I said, you know what, I said, I could probably get this done in about 3 weeks. And so he was like, yeah, right. You know, well, 14 months later. And I told Dave Blue, I said, you know, probably, you know, we'll get propaganda films to, you know, put it together, and, you know, I said it probably cost us $30,000. And at that time, you know, home videos would sell maybe, you know, 15 or 20,000, and I thought, well, a Michael home video will sell 50,000. So, you know, you work out the P&L, and it's like, well, we can't spend a lot. By the time we finished, we spent $400,000 at that video. But Michael was thrilled with it, but he kept changing things. He wanted this one classical piece in there, and we couldn't get the license for it. The license was $150,000 or something for that one song. It was just crazy because it happened to be a union thing, and it was an orchestra, you know, so everybody's got to get paid. So anyway, the business affairs people are saying no. So anyway, I finally convinced him on this other musical piece, that we could license much more inexpensively. And the other thing was that that I came up with the idea of, which was didn't take a lot of thinking, but for the jam video to do it around basketball, obviously. And my idea that I mentioned in a marketing meeting was, hey, let's get Michael Jordan into this, and we'll do MJ squared, Michael Jackson, Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan teaches Michael Jackson how to play basketball, and Michael Jackson teaches Michael Jordan how to dance, and I had somebody from the promotion department take me aside after the meeting and said, are you trying to kill Michael Jackson? He can't stand up to Michael Jordan. And I said, excuse me, but Michael Jackson is an athlete. It's just in a different way. This guy has, he has trained himself physically, dance-wise, since he was a kid. And when Michael Jordan and Michael Jackson got together, they had the greatest time, and because they recognized each other for the brilliance that they both had. They had a ball. They loved being teased by the other one. I was dealing with their office and with Michael's office as a management company, and anyway, I was really busy, and we're having a baby, and all this stuff is going on, and I realized, hey, wait a minute, we're in the playoffs here, and we have this shoot planned in Chicago. There's a 4-day window between the end of the first round of the playoffs and the second round, and it's like, and the Bulls had won the first two, and they needed to win one more, and it was like, oh my God, if they don't win this game, it's going to throw this video, into chaos. And it was a $400,000 budget. I mean, that was like a dream, And anyway, I called Michael Jordan's manager and got his assistant on the phone, and I said, look, we need to come up with a contingency plan. If literally it was the day of the game, and I said, we got to come up with a contingency plan in case the Bulls lose. And she said, what are you talking about? They're not losing. They're winning tonight, You don't need another plan. And I said, well, I mean, for the 1%.
Still gotta show up and play the game.
And she said, absolutely not. Just go sit down, and the Bulls will take care of it. Michael will take care of it, right? So anyway, I go home that night, and I get home, and it's like 8 o'clock or 8:30 or something at night, and I turn on the game, and it's like in the second quarter, and the Bulls are losing by 15. And I thought, oh my God, how am I going to tell Dave Blue tomorrow that the video shoot just crashed because I bet on this window? And so anyway, I think by halftime they were down by 8 or 10 or whatever, and then they were down by 2 at the end of the third quarter, and they pulled it out, and I was like a wet rag at the end of that game. I'd never rooted for the Chicago Bulls more than.
So you come in, and it's the eve of Dangerous release in a matter of weeks. What's the mood? And I feel like at that time, there are some storm clouds, but still the focus is on the music, on what's coming from Michael. It's still, that's the bulk of the attention remains on the work. So what's the feeling around the team as you're going into that release?
Well, number one, the first 2 videos were one was shot, and the plan for the second one was there. So I knew we were fine there. And I was actually looking ahead to the second single to get the artwork. And I flew out to LA and met with Sam Emerson, who I knew from my days in publicity. He'd done a lot of photo shoots, backstage stuff and all that for all kinds of acts for us. And Sam was like my lifeline, and I went out to a Pepsi shoot, and Sam was there organizing hundreds of photos, and Sam got me the picture I needed, and and then I was set. So literally, once I got kind of into the camp, we felt pretty good about it. And what happened was we had 4 singles that went out and just slammed it. And as we got into January of 1993, we were 15 months into the campaign. We had 4 hits. We had Michael set for the Super Bowl. He was set for the Grammys with Janet. I don't know if anybody remembers, but it was like one of the sweetest, truest moments for Michael. There was nothing fake about it. It was his little sister honoring him, and they were wonderful together. So we had all these things, and then we did Oprah, and Michael beatboxed on Oprah, which 99% of people in America didn't know what beatboxing was, and they saw it. He gave them a lesson right on the Oprah thing. And I had filmed Make-A-Wish Day in November, just after Thanksgiving, and it's the first time Michael had ever had cameras on the property, and which gave way to agreeing to allow Oprah to do her special with Michael on the property, and that was a huge hit. So then he won all the awards and all the the TV shows. So March of '93, basically the campaign was done, and I thought we brought it back to music. We had remixed all, Frank Cirillo, who was our dance music guy, had gone out and got remixers for everybody. We went into the clubs and just four-walled it, and every style of club music. And so it really kind of cemented a base for Michael that was there, but hadn't been solidified, So that's where we were in March of '93, and then he went away to do the Dangerous International Tour, and I didn't see him for like 5 months, 6 months, and then the charges came out in August of '93, and I thought, it's over. I'll never see him again.
Before we get to that chapter, you brought up, talk about, because it's pretty remarkable to read your account of the Super Bowl performance, because now we know what that has come to represent, but that really is the moment that everybody points to, that like that's when the halftime show became the biggest showcase, the biggest moment of the year. He invents that, and you're literally right in the middle of it.
Yep, it's remarkable. Actually, as Sandy's office got it started with the NFL people, and I think we were encouraging it, but they made the first contact, and then I was thrown into meeting with the NFL people, just on ancillary issues, tickets, everything, and then before that, they might have had a superstar sing the national anthem, but usually it was like a band, like a marching band playing halftime, and all of a sudden it all changed. That halftime, actually, the ratings were higher than for the game. And that was Dallas and Buffalo, if you remember. I think it was 52-10 or something like that. But anyway,
but with no precedent for that, you're staging it. They're staging it. He's pops out of the toaster up into the sky, holds the pose forever, and lets the screams go for 2 minutes. Like, it wasn't.
They were freaking out.
That was brand new.
Yeah.
To do any of that.
Yeah, I number one, Michael's instincts to hold for over 2 minutes. Literally, the production people were like scrambling. What the hell's going on? What happened is he's frozen. and at first, what there was, it was a look-alike up on top of the scoreboard, and then boom, he popped out of the toaster and froze, and it was like unbelievable. But what I had done before that, I had done a music video with Stevie Ray Vaughan. Actually, after Stevie had passed away, and we did a video for his greatest hits album that was a love song for the guitar. And well, I actually with my son had watched Sesame Street, and they had this saxophone thing that they did. You know, they had their little 2-minute clips, and it was a saxophone making all these like off-key sounds, and then they had a manufacturing plant with manufacturing saxophones, and then they had a craftsman bending it, and you know. And I thought, oh, we should cop that and do a love song to the guitar for Stevie, and then we put blues singers, and you know, and a tribute to the, you know, the genre that Stevie wanted to be involved in. And so anyway, from that, I did that with Phil Tuckett from NFL Films, and I called Phil up, and Phil was one of the few guys you could call up and say, I have an idea, would you be interested in shooting this? You know, usually you'd call them up and say, you're from the record company, I don't want to hear your idea. You know, so, but Phil was one of those guys that he was a little older, and you know, you know, he just loved the opportunity. So we did that, and I went back to Phil and I said, hey Phil, NFL Films, you're going to be at the Super Bowl, right? He said, yeah. I said, how about if we shoot behind the scenes for the halftime? Could I hire NFL Films to do that for us? He said, absolutely. And we made a deal for $28,000 to have all the NFL Films people shoot the halftime. And so actually I just heard Sony I've been telling them about that footage because it was in the NFL Films archives, and I've been telling them for years, you got to look at this, you know, and because all this footage was there, and no one did. And finally, I just heard that they're working on a behind the scenes, the Michael Jackson Super Bowl. You know, which is just phenomenal.
Finally gone back in and excavated that stuff.
And those assets are there, you know. And Michael that day, we were backstage, Phil and I and Jim Scully, who was our head of sales. He and Phil were great buddies. So Phil said, hey, why don't you two guys be my assistants with my handheld? So we went out, we were in the crowd, we were getting the Buffalo Bills running on the field. We did the whole game, and but we were backstage. We had a couple of hours before the game was coming on, and lo and behold, Michael comes strolling in. There's nobody around but the three of us and Michael and
Gary Coleman.
What's
Gary
that?
Coleman.
Yes, and Michael said, Dan, what are you doing here? And I said, well, Michael, I hired NFL Films to shoot behind the scenes. He said, oh my God, this is great. He was just thrilled, you know. And so then the two of them started playing tag, and they were, the way they did the staging for the Super Bowl staging is they got like 1,500 volunteer fire department people, and they had all this scaffolding that ran up through the tunnel, actually outside the stadium. And then when they broke for commercial, they had like 3 minutes for these firemen to run it out there and put the stage together. I mean, wow. Just brilliant, you know. And so anyway, but Michael and they're playing tag on all this stuff. So Phil's shooting all that. He got all this crazy stuff going on, and you know, but Michael then. They finished playing tag, and he said, oh, hey, Dan, you know, I'm going to go rest for a while. And it was, you know, here was a guy who was going to perform for 100 million people that day, and it was like nothing, you know. I mean, you just can't put your finger on that, you know.
So as you said, when Dangerous wraps up, when touring wraps up, then we move into the charges begin, and there's a, you know, big transformation of everything going into what becomes the History Project.
Yeah.
And it's a transformation not just externally, but it certainly feels like internally for Michael, that whether it's reaction to everything that's going on? Or, well, I mean, talk about it, because, it, as you describe, it seems like it becomes very hard for anybody to convince him of anything, talk him out of anything that might be a bad idea, that his sense of scale and everything sort of, blows up. What, we know it's changing in the world, but what do you think is changing within Michael world in between these projects?
Well, one of the things that Michael said publicly, but he said often to us, is that, everybody knows me. Everybody knows I wouldn't, he in some ways was so simplified in his thinking. It's like, well, everybody knows who I am. I wouldn't do anything. And there was that side. There was also the stubborn side that said, the media's after me. So that was going on. And of course, the tabloids were doing their thing for a long time, and when the charges came out, then the mainstream media, got involved. And, there was really, two tracks to that. There was the print media and there was TV. There was no social media. So once it transferred to both of those, it was like the story was four-walled. And then I think senior management at Sony was like, get this out before it all collapses. And there was a real energy to get this record out, and also to just put a massive push on it. So basically, I was told just carpet bomb it, and so I was out dealing with every one of our branches, okay, we're gonna build, the top of Tower Records Sunset, we're gonna have the cover 18 feet high, and just, there were something like 23,000 retail stores at that time, and we were making a plan for each area, whether they're black independent stores, whether it was Strawberries or Camelot, or all the chains, Tower, etc. What we were doing with Walmart. We actually took a plane out. I went out with the sales team to every account. We did 2 weeks of flying around the U.S. on the Sony jet, meeting with retailers, and also setting up pools for the SoundScan numbers. And what we would do is, I would slightly lowball my picks, and then the sales force would kind of goose the buyers, and we basically wanted them to win the pool. So we kind of pushed that, but we carpet bombed, the marketplace in every way.
The challenge, and it's hard to exactly reconstruct all the chronology on all this, but it seems like just in the minds of the world, dangerous still, when you thought of Michael Jackson, you thought of the music first, and then you thought of, there's the other weird stuff, whatever, down the line. And that flips as you're going into history, where what is top of mind for everybody is the scandal, the allegations, and the music is somewhere down the list, which has got to be an enormous, that's a total shift and a huge hurdle in front of what you're trying to do.
Well, that's it. And, we would go, Dave Glue and I would go to the studio and encourage Michael to finish the album. And there were 3 studios running 24/7 for like a year. And there was so much money being spent. I just spoke to Dave the other day, and we were just laughing about how incredible the money spent was, But as a joint venture, it was all being, so much is being charged back to Michael. And but anyway, in the studio, of course, the last thing that happens is the vocals go on. So, but we were getting bits and pieces of what he was writing about, and it was like, and we're hearing the music, and I got to thinking, it's a double album. One album is the greatest hits, and the other album is the new stuff. And I thought, well, one is his history, and the other is his story, because he was really kind of pleading his case on the new songs. There's there's a kind of a darkness in those songs, and it's interesting as I follow the fans now. Many of the fans love that album, and I think they love it for that he was standing up for himself, and. But anyway, so I actually pitched him on the idea of the history, his story, and I sent a fax, and I wrote down the HISTORY, and actually the day before I went up to Dave Blue's office, and Polly Anthony, who was head of pop promotion for us, and our promotion department was panicked that radio was going to join the media in turning off to Michael. And if that was the case, we were dead in the water, And so the promotion department was panicked. And so everything from the promotion department was, we can't have King of Pop. Radio's going to hate it. There was all this, worry, and for good reason. So anyway, I said, I went up and I said, David said, hey, Dan, you got to, work Sandy on getting Michael to come up with an album title, or, we need to get working on some artwork, and we needed to convince Michael that it was just as great to be finished as it was to be enjoying the comforts of being in the studio with engineers that he loved and producers that he loved, So anyway, and going to this meeting with Dave and Polly, 7 o'clock one night in the office, I said, I just spoke to Sandy, and Sandy, I said, Sandy, does Michael have a title for the album? And he said, no, why don't you come up with something? And I said, well, Sandy, isn't it a little personal? I mean, it's his greatest hits. He's been working on this for, 15, 20 years. I mean, Michael might have an idea. Could you please ask him, So anyway, I get a call from Sandy literally the next afternoon, and he said, I spoke to Michael, and he said, why don't you come up with some ideas? So anyway, I take this to Dave and Polly, and we're all kind of rolling our eyes. And Polly said, just kind of wistfully shaking her head, she said, I just wish Michael could come up with a title like Immaculate Collection, like Madonna. It's such a cool name. And I walked away from that, it really hit me. Yeah, it needs to be something. So on the way home on the Long Island Railroad, I thought of the history thing, and basically Cyndi Lauper had years before talked about herstory, and she did it kind of after one of the campaigns, so we never really used it right, And I thought, wow, man, that's an idea. That's what gave me the idea for his story thing, So anyway, I the next day Polly and David, I would get together at the end of the day, almost every day, and talk about what was going on. And I said, hey, I had this idea, and everybody kind of went, So I faxed it to Sandy and never heard a word. And Dave got nervous the next week, and he said, look, go out and just hire everybody. Copywriters, poets, whoever, artists, to come up with concepts for the album. So we came up with the idea of, we paid like $1,500 or $2,500 just for the concepts. And then if you got the gig, then you got really paid for it, So we had, dozens of presentations. We had, probably 80, I don't know, I forget what the number was. We had them all shipped out to Nancy Donald, who was the art director who had always worked with Michael, to her office. And then we Dave and I flew out, and Nancy Donald, who was the art director, and Arnold Levine, who was head of creative services. We piled all this stuff into a van. We hauled it over to Sandy's office. We hauled it up the stairs. And as we walked in with the first load of stuff, that we had like big boards, and all this crazy stuff. As we walked in with the first load of stuff for this presentation for Michael, Sandy's assistant leaned around the corner and said, "Oh, Dan, isn't it great? Michael's going to use your history idea." And I thought, we just spent $150,000. I sent a fax, And then I was embarrassed because here Nancy and Arnold and all these people had done all this work for nothing. So I just kind of tried to make myself really small for this meeting. We went in, Michael came in, jumped up on the conference table, which the end was against the wall. He leaned against the wall, and there were probably 3 or 4 of us on each side of the table, and Nancy and Arnold up there presenting each one of these ideas. After each one, Michael would chuckle and say nothing. Oh, that's nice. And we did all these presentations, and then we walked out of there, and we were all kind of numb, And then we flew back to New York, and I said to Dave, look, I'll go back out there in 2 weeks and get something going on the history idea. So when I got back out there, Michael had already hired the computer animation company to create the statue, because that was his idea of history. It was statues and world wars and all this, everything you learn in 5th grade history class,
But it seems, at least as you tell the story, it seems like you and the team are not really spending a lot of time thinking about what's true, what's not true, what's these allegations, the charges. Like, it seems like everybody's got their head down, working.
Yeah.
Not, again, at least as you tell it, not terribly distracted, other than we've still got to execute.
Right. I think there was so much pressure on getting this thing out as quickly as we could that you didn't have time to, But I have to tell you, every morning I went out on my front step and picked up Newsday to see what was on the front cover, because that was where I would get my marching orders. Oh my God, we got another crisis,
Right.
And because it would be, Michael was in the news, and so much of it was negative, and so every morning I would hold my breath, go out, look at the paper, and say, okay, we can go to work today.
So you alluded to it a bit before, but talk about, because it's infinitely memorable. Plus, it's on the cover, the Scream video. What it represented to do that, to set up the album, and what it turned into, seemingly minute by minute, as this thing's actually getting made.
Yeah, it was really unique. Number one, we knew, hey, Janet was so hot at the time, to have that duet, it was a lock, and we knew we would get rock and pop and black radio, and so we felt very confident with the airplay, and the big thing was get the right video. And we hired Propaganda and Mark Romanek to direct, who Janet insisted upon, and we couldn't tell Michael that the only director she was going to work with was Mark Romanek. So her manager, I can't believe Sade's manager also.
Roger Davies?
Yes, Roger. Yeah, and I had begged Roger to manage Sade, and we had become very good friends when he took over Sade, and they're still partners to today. And so Roger called me up and said, Janet's willing to do this video, but she's only going to work with one director, and that's Mark Romanek. And I said, Roger, you can't breathe a word of that to anybody. because if that gets back to Michael, we're dead in the water. He said, so you just got to be quiet and believe that it may take us some time to convince Michael, because we're going to have to do it slowly. But you have to trust that we'll get the job done. So I went to Dave and said, Dave, this is what, this is the circumstance. So anyway, we went to Michael. Michael wanted to hire Joe Pitt, who had done some videos for him before, and we said, no, we think this guy, Mark Romanek, would be great, and Michael was not, when Michael had an idea, he'd get very firm about it. If you could get to Michael before he had solidified an idea, you could convince him, you could reason with him, but if he got onto an idea, he'd get very excited about it, and that kind of cemented his belief in the idea. It was very, very difficult to get him off an idea once it was set. So we kind of surrounded him, Sandy and Scott Spanchik, who was our video production guy who worked for me, Polly, Dave, and me. We met with Michael in the studio and really convinced him, you got to look at Mark's reels and all the people he shot, and he gradually acquiesced. And then once we got him to meet with Mark, then the usual thing happened. The production companies started cranking the budget. They started, and so we got the treatment, and the treatment looked great, and the storyboards and all of that. But it was a non-linear video, and there was no lip syncing in the video except for the screen. So they didn't need to do any playback. So this is an 11-day shoot on the Universal lot. And so about the 8th or 9th day, it's driving me crazy, because I have been involved in hundreds of music videos where, you shoot it in one day and you're hearing the music over and over and over again because of the lip sync. So here we were shooting this non-linear video, so it was just these shots, and so there's no storyline, and there's no music, and it was getting to me,
Kind of what we got.
So I went to Mark, and we're on the set. It's a Friday night. It's about 11:30, and I said, there were all these Gibson V's that were being used as almost like wallpaper on the back wall, and I said, Mark, nice to see a guitar in there, because it is a music video, And I said, I haven't heard a note for 8 days, but I said, is there, could you have Michael touch one of the guitars or something that connects it musically, and he said, well, what do you want me to do, and just flippantly I said, well, why don't you have him smash one of them like Pete Townsend? And he said, I like that. And he said, why don't you ask Michael if he wants to do it? He said, it's got all the angst of what the video attitude is and the whole thing. So anyway, I went down to Michael's trailer and got in there, and he and Janet were there, and I ended up spending an hour and a half explaining how all the retail tracking worked, and Michael was very, very proud of the plan that Polly and I had put together to try to bring Scream in at #1 the first week, and it had never been done before. And Michael was like, oh man, my record company, so he's telling his little sister, hey, the record company really has a great plan. Dan, can you explain it? So I spent an hour and a half, like they're just like summer camp. They're like cross-legged on the floor, and I'm explaining how SoundScan works. Yeah. So anyway, so I leave, but like an hour and a half later, they're shut down up on the set, and Mark Romanek is like screaming, looking for me, and Michael's security, once you got inside with Michael, no one interrupted. So you were in another world, you know. No one was going to find you, you know. So anyway, when I walked out, so I raced back up to the set, and Mark said, "Okay, here's what we got: baseball shin guards. We've painted them silver. It's going to look futuristic. We're going to put steel-toed boots on him. We've got work gloves. We've got, you know, these aviator work glasses, and all. It's going to look futuristic, but it's all for his protection." And I said, "Great, great, great." And he said, "There is one problem." And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "These are steel body guitars." Oh. So smashing these things, Michael's gonna like vibrate for about 2 weeks, you know. So anyway, they got, you know, one of the workshop people, you know, had worked on a few of these things, and as far as scoring them, so that how they would break, and they had it worked out pretty well. And then Mark turned to me and said, "And by the way, this is on you." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, if he gets hurt, it's on you." And so this is now like 1:30 in the morning on Saturday morning. You know, I can't call the business affairs office. I can't call Dave Glue. And so when Michael came up to the set before this next shoot, in which they were going to do this little scene, you know, Michael was on the set. I walked up to him and I said, "Look, we have a problem here. We're about 6-8 weeks in front of the album. If you get hurt, we don't have a music video for the release date." And I said, "You probably don't have a product manager." You know, I'll be out the door. And anyway, Michael, let's do it instantly. It's like, no fear, let's do it. So I went back to Mark and I said, you know, he's ready to go. And he said, "Okay, we'll do it twice." And it worked. And I picked up a piece of the guitar and put it in my pocket, the guts of the guitar. So, but it worked, you know. And it's 3 seconds of the video.
But it's memorable. It's in slow mo and it's a memorable shot. So it's not. You bring it up. I'm going to ask real quick because this is one of the nerdiest things I'm ever going to say. I was just listening to a podcast about getting the songs entering the charts at number one. And that it had never been done. And you sell yourself short in the book because Scream didn't come in at number one, but it came in at number 5, right, which was the highest anybody had ever come in.
Right. And then we followed.
And then You Are Not Alone becomes the first that does come in at number 1. So without doing the full seminar on it, I think I gather a lot of that is sort of about front-loading the airplay.
It was at putting 99-cent sales by the cash register, and Polly and I, you know, from the Scream circumstance, we looked at when the radio points and the retail points would come in, and we configured that idea to see if we could do it again. You know, the benefit we had with Scream was the album wasn't out, so. The real problem was now we were on number 2 single, and people were buying the album. They weren't buying the single. So we had to really scramble to make that work, you know, and we did. It came in number 1. It's, in the meantime, this week, you know, Taylor Swift has 10 songs.
1 through 12. 1 through 12.
Yeah, 1 through 12.
Yeah, we're playing a different game now. But,
yeah.
So I think I'll ask this and then see if there's questions out there. I think we're sort of at that time. You know, we know Michael Jackson is a complicated, is a tragic story, is a, you know, many layers to this story. What do you know, when you walk away from this, when you do wind it down and process it and then go through retelling it for the book, what do you, in the end, what do you make of this guy? What do you make of this story that is so, you know, massive, symbolic, this profoundly deep American celebrity story, everything that comes with it, from the inside out, the stuff that you did. What do you take away from it?
Well, number one, for the long time that it took me to write this book, a lot of it was my anxiety about trying to get the story straight, factually, in order. Everything was a jumble, and thankfully I had some good guidance. Lana Nash, who's an author who really helped me through this. A woman by the name of Rebecca Carpenter actually helped me before that kind of organize the timeline. And then this fellow Pez Jacks, who is a super fan in London, really helped fact check. He's a
those are who you need.
Yes, because I knew if I got anything wrong, the fans are going to say this is bogus, So the first thing I had to do was get this right, and then Ira really did the finishing touch. He did the final edit, which was just amazing, and really at that point it was like great. I felt like, okay, we got the story right. And then when we got the first comments for the back cover, it was like they got it. So that, from my end, first it was that, and then it evolved to me that what I was trying to do was identify this as tragic, identify it as complicated, and that people over the years have just simplified it to he's guilty, he's not guilty. And I thought there's so much more to this, and so much more to learn from it,
and there's little things, your encounters such as they are with his father.
Yeah.
They're brief, but they're really telling.
Yeah. It's, Joe was pretty weird. And, I met him in the dark, in his office on Sunset. And we were at 6430 Sunset at the time, and his office was literally across the street. And Pat Siciliano, who was our publicist at Epic, he and I walked over to meet Joe and just basically welcomed the Jacksons to Epic. And the publicity department was way into them and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, we opened the door and it's completely dark. And we walked down this hallway and I mean, probably, at least as long as this room, completely in the dark. And we turn the corner and there's a desk there, like an assistant's desk, whereas, and he's sitting there in the dark. And and Pat knew him and said, hey, Pat, hey, Joe, this is Dan, blah, blah, blah. And Joe started talking about all the security he had and how many cameras he had around the place and all this stuff. And never once talked about his kids, And it was like, so we had this, 10-minute meeting, and it was like, and we left. And it was just like, we got outside, and I said to Pat, that's like the creepiest meeting I've ever been in my life. The guy was sitting in the dark in there. I don't know, maybe he didn't pay the electric bill. I don't know what happened.
But just all of these pieces that go into that make up Michael Jackson.
Well, and that's it. And, I think that's part of the mystery, the mystique is that, what happened? What happened with this kid, And, and you think about bands being on the road and things. He was on the road with his older brothers. Who knew what was going on? They're bringing girls back and, what was going on. He was a kid. And so there's all that. And also that there was no normalcy. I don't think, in some ways, in kind of a defensive Michael, is that he didn't know normalcy, so, and he was awkward. So, maybe some of the the potential accusations about him were just his, his awkwardness.
But that's it. I mean, even the sense of, he's trying to, hold on to his childhood. He's trying to recreate his childhood. He didn't have that childhood.
Right.
He was trying to create this invention of what he perceived childhood was like.
Right.
I mean, that's the thing that I think gets, not misunderstood. There's a reason that he surrounds himself with Gary Coleman and Brooke Shields,
right.
and those who had these comparable experiences.
Right.
Those are the only ones who could possibly understand what that is.
It's what is it? Paul Peterson, who formed the organization for child actors, and so many of them really had issues. So it's and struggles in their lives, but it is a sad story, and yet we also have to, my kids growing up at that time when I was working with Michael, they were babies. My son was maybe 6 or 8 years old, and so they had no recollection. And when they got a little older, and something would pop up on TV about Michael Jackson, and so I used to work with him and the whole thing, and then I'd get this side eye from my kids, and I realized, they have no recollection of the other side of Michael, the earlier side of Michael, the childhood star, the thriller star. They never knew that. All they knew was the tabloid stuff, and I just thought it was so sad that you have to be 50 years old now to remember the genius of Michael, and so it is sad. It is, and I thought, hey, I just recall a small piece of this, every day that I was working on it and talking to him 3 times in a day, he was on the phone with 20 other people doing all kinds of other stuff. So, I probably, I never knew really the musicians who played them. I knew some of the engineers and, Bruce Swedeen and, some of the people working with them in the studio. But, Michael had this vast, field of associates. Some of them were hangers-on, and some of them, you wonder, why is he hanging out with these people? I think he felt sorry for a lot of people, and those were kind of the hangers-on that, I think, some of them tried to take advantage of him. And then there were the other people, which were top of the line, whether it was choreographers or, Jim Morey, who was, I think, a genius at staging touring. He did all the Neil Diamond stuff for all those years. Neil Diamond was one of the most successful touring artists ever, in say the 60s, 70s, 80s. And so Jim, was the nuts and bolts guy, Sandy's partner, and he's enjoyed the book. It's I've gotten a couple of notes from him, and and Dave Glue. They all just laugh incredulously. It's like, what did we go through?
It means you got it right. Then that's worth it. So, all right. Okay. Thank you all. Thank you.
Keep it going for Alan Light.